All right, we've been through a lot. We've been through a lot with Moses and the children of Israel, from the Pharaoh rising and not remembering all the great things Joseph did for his country, killing all the babies, Moses being saved, being raised in Pharaoh's household for 40 years, killing someone, going to the Midian and being a shepherd for 40 years, meeting God at the burning bush, God telling him to go deliver his people, and God being very patient with Moses during this entire process. And then Moses going to Egypt to get the people out. We've been through the 10 plagues together and all that would have entailed. We've been through the Passover. We've been through the actual leaving of Egypt, being trapped at the Red Sea, and Moses lifting up his rod and the Red Sea splitting and the children of Israel going on dry land. We've looked back at the Red Sea as all of Pharaoh's army was destroyed in the Red Sea. We've seen the wagon wheels floating and bobbing and all the people of Egypt dying. We've heard the prayer of praise that Moses delivers, thanking God for that deliverance. And at the end of that prayer of praise, he says, I feel like it's an epiphany, it's a major point to me in this text, is he's looking at all this and says, when we get to the promised land, they're going to be scared to death of us. And exactly what has happened. It's like he's recognizing for the first time. That's why you did all this stuff, God. It's because when we go there, the story's going to get there before we get there, and it's going to get everybody scared, and we're going to have huge success. So they've crossed the Red Sea, they've lacked food and water, they complained. Now they seem to have food, they seem to have water, but they have lots of questions, and they have a lot of disputing going on amongst themselves. And that's where we're going to pick up. So let's go ahead and bow for a word of prayer. Our great God, we are so thankful for your word. We're so thankful that it helps us in our life, and we can see these examples in the Old Testament, and we can see your character. We can see that you truly are a patient God. And so Jesus, when he comes to earth and he shows patience, he's just reflecting who you are, because he is the exact representation of you. And so we are so grateful that we see all these wonderful stories. Help us, Lord, not to complain. Help us to trust. Help us to follow you. Help us to love you, and help us to do your will. Thank you for all the good things that you give us. Through Jesus we pray. Amen. All right, so we're in Exodus chapter 18. Exodus chapter 18 is where we are going to begin this morning. Like I said, they seem to be in a fairly decent place with food, clothing, and shelter, and they have all the stuff that they need to live on. But they get to this mountain. And one point that we have to find out about Jethro, or realize about Jethro, Jethro heard about all the good things that happened to Moses, which prompted him to decide to take Moses' wife and boys back to him. So that, again, is a small detail in the text, but very powerful to show us that story oftentimes spreads faster than anything else. So the story was spreading so fast that Jethro had heard about this, and so he knows what God has done, and so he decides it's time to go give Moses his wife and his children back. So question number one there is, what did Moses tell Jethro, and what was his reaction? So what was the advice that he gives, and what was Moses' reaction to that advice? Raise your hand, microphone, speak directly into the microphone. Joe has his hand up. Mary has a hand up. Go ahead, Mary. Joe needs a microphone too. We have another microphone.
The passage said that Moses told Jethro all that God had done for Israel and how he had taken care of them all the way. And Jethro's response was that he blessed the Lord and said, "Now I know the Lord is greater than all the gods." And so he's answering the question that Pharaoh asked.
Okay, very good.
As we've seen along the way, that question keeps coming up and it keeps being answered. And so Jethro is noting that. And then it says he also offered a sacrifice to God.
All right, very good, very good. So just imagine this for a second. So you meet, they have the meeting, and when they meet, they sort of have some pleasantries, right? How are you doing? Everything's fine with me, checking in with one another, and so they have that conversation. And then Moses and Jethro go in Moses' tent, and it says Moses tells him all the wonders that God had done, and he tells him all the obstacles that they had had along the way and how God had helped them overcome all those obstacles. Now, sometimes we play this game or we think in our mind, what Bible event would you like to be at? If you could go back in time, you'd like to see the Red Sea crossing or any of these good things. If you could be in a discussion in the Old Testament, this would be a really cool discussion, right? Moses recounting all the good things God had done in the land of Egypt in a one-on-one conversation sort of with his father-in-law, and his father-in-law may be asking questions. You can just see Moses going in detail, plague by plague by plague by plague, and then he goes through all of this stuff. We didn't have any food, we didn't have any water. This is how God took care of the water the first time. This is how God took care of the food. This is how God took care of this. All of this stuff. And can you just picture Jethro on the edge of his seat, like with eyes wide open, like, really? Really? He did that? And what happened next? Oh, he did that? What happened next? That happened? And at the end, as Mary pointed out, his reaction, praise God that God was able to do all of these incredible, wonderful things through you. And he basically comes to where God wants everybody to be. That I know for certain that God is the only God. And that's what God wanted Pharaoh to know. He wanted the Egyptians to know. He wanted Moses and Aaron and the Israelites to know. And throughout the whole process, he made sure that Moses and everybody knew, I don't only want your generation to know this, I want you to pass it on to the next generation so everybody will know that I am the only God. All right, Joe, do you have something?
Well, she had basically the answer. But one thing that was interesting is in verse 19 is Jethro rejoiced over hearing that. It made his heart happy. He had, sort of skin in the game because of his, family and stuff like that. But still, he was so happy to hear such wonderful news. And I think we need to be excited and happy to hear wonderful news and not just, oh, that's great, and go on down the road. So I think here's a guy that believes in many gods, or so it seems, and he's excited and rejoiced to hear about what God has done for his people.
Yeah. This eliminates, in Jethro's mind, and it should eliminate all of our minds, and it should eliminate it in their minds, all doubt. And doesn't that make life a lot simpler and a lot easier? And when everything gets boiled down to its simplest form, and you understand a very important principle, and it all becomes clear to you, rejoicing seems to be a natural response there. And so, there's a rejoicing because of what's happened, and Moses is safe, and now they can reunite with family. But man, this is a question that the whole world wants to know the answer to. And do people still live in total chaos because they don't understand the answer? There's only one God, and this is the Bible is His Word. We need to please Him and do what He wants. Yeah, and so now this is a huge moment. Somebody have the microphone? Anybody have a microphone? Okay. All right, anything else on this? We covered this maybe a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, and Brian did a class on this, so I don't want to spend too much time on this particular story. But you have anything else about this first meeting and Moses relaying this story to his father-in-law? All right, so what happens next is they get up the next day, and Moses, I can't even imagine this. Moses goes outside, and he stands there, and then all the people start coming. And they start presenting all their cases, all their squabbles, all their questions, what if your job, and I know some of you probably have this job or a similar job, that you feel like all you do is put out fires all day long, or all you do is mediate between people all day long. Could you imagine that? And could you imagine if you had the visual of this, looking out, and there was a line out the door of people, and they were all coming to talk to you, and they wanted to know what to do? How many of you would that just totally exhaust? How many of you would immediately go to Indeed and try to find another job? I mean, I would. I'd be like, there's got to be a better job than this, because I don't like this. This is very difficult. And this, at the end of the day, does he feel like, I got it all handled one day, tomorrow's going to be something totally different, and it's going to be better? The next day, the alarm clock goes off. He goes back to the office, and he looks at the door, and there's the line of people, and they're all out the door. Now, if you were on the other side of this equation, and you only had one place to go to get answers to your questions, and only one, let's say there's only one person in Orlando, Florida, that had to take care of all the court cases in Orlando. And it was not organized, first come, first served basis. And you went there, and at the end of the night, the guy just closes the door, court adjourned for the day, and he goes to his room. How exhausting would that be for you? We've already talked about in a little bit of Lord's Supper talk, we don't have a lot of patience. Right? I don't have a lot of patience. You might have tons of patience, but chances are you don't. And chances are, if you had to wait in line all day long and then not get your problem solved and had to come back the next day and wait in line all day long. Now, Jethro is looking at this. And what is his response to all of this? And what does he tell Moses? Raise your hand if you have an answer you want to share with us. This is a sort of simple, so anybody want to take the low-hanging fruit? You can take it. All right, Mary and Joe are going to take the low-hanging fruit. All right, we have another one up here too. Randy's up here. He has one too. Randy's up here. He has one. Joe, go for it.
I mean, he just says this is not the way you need to be doing this. You know, he just says, assign people that can handle the minor cases, if you will. I think he said like hundreds and fifties and tens and things like that. And then if there's things that come out of this, and it has to come up to you, have it come up to you, and then he can go to God. And so, that's sort of how he handled it. That's what was recommended, and that's what he did. And it doesn't say this, but he was a priest. Jethro was a priest, and I kind of wondered if he's recommending this because he had to go through that first. I don't know. That's just my supposition.
Yeah, I don't know if that's the answer. I know that he says this is the commandment of God.
Yeah.
And this, so God's
told him something. I don't. That's what I'm saying. I just kind of wondered if he thought, that's going to be a wise thing. But that's sort of what he did. He just broke it down so it wouldn't encumber Moses.
First, one thing he says, this isn't working. This is not a good idea. You're going to wear yourself out. You're going to wear the people out. I do like the question that he asked Moses, and that's a very important question. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing? Are there some times where we do things where we even think about why we're doing them? And I get that in Moses' response. Well, the people just come, and when they come, and I feel like I got to give them an answer, and so I've just been doing this. That's just the way that we do it around here. And we've been doing it this way since the beginning, and I don't know of any other way, and so I'm just going to keep doing it this way until I know something else. And I think that does show a little bit of what happens in life sometimes. Have you ever sat back in something that you've done for a long time, even spiritually, religiously, and you say, why are we doing that? Why am I doing that? And you have to ask that question. It's a good question to ask yourself over and over and over again. Why are we doing this? Why am I doing this? What's the purpose of this? And I think that's an important part of this. All right, Mary and then Randy.
I had basically the same answer, that he advised Moses to delegate. We hear a lot about delegation today, to trustworthy people, and take only the cases that he couldn't resolve or that they couldn't resolve. But the effect was that it would free Moses to do what he was meant to do, which is commune with God and communicate the laws to the people. Yeah. If he had to be resolving point by point all of these cases that came to him, he wouldn't have time to do that.
Yeah, I think that's another huge point here. If you do it this way, what you're going to do, instead of being someone who's just handling disputes all the time, you're going to be someone who's going to be able to teach the law of God to people. And that is humongous. Because what we're going to have, and keep this in context of what's coming next with God delivering the Ten Commandments. So now you have this case where Moses is just giving this over and over and over again, and the result is now you can do what you were supposed to do. And if the people know the law better and what God wants, what should happen to all the disputing? As the knowledge of the law and God's rules go up, the disputing should go down.
down.
And so what the way that you're doing this isn't the first step is out of the way. So now you're going to be doing this forever. All right, Randy, then Brian has a hand up too.
Well, I had one more thing to say. That is it good advice for today? And I said yes, because as a church grows, the elders spend more time shepherding, and then they have the deacons to help, and sometimes in small churches the preacher or one or two elders do everything, and that's fine in a small church. But in a larger church, it's not ideal.
Absolutely. Delegating work to responsible people is always probably a good idea, right? It's not only responsible because it takes things off your plate that they can do so you can do what you're supposed to be doing, but what does it do for the people that you delegate the job to? There's already a good person, right? They're already a trustworthy person. It builds them up, it helps them, and it helps them grow and become what God wants to do. So it helps the whole group together. Randy?
It was just two things. One that's already been mentioned, it makes the thing function better. And I remember when I went into the Navy as a basic training as a recruit, at one point the drill sergeants, they called them company commanders, but like drill sergeants left. They had told us what to do to clean up the barracks, and they left. Of course, they left to watch, Anyway, so I love to clean things, and I got something.
Anybody have anything needs cleaning? He's volunteering right now. He loves to do it. You'll be doing him a favor.
And so I was cleaning up underneath this cabinet or something with a broom or something, and the drill sergeant guy came in, and he was not happy at all, because I thought we were all basically the same, but because I had a degree when I went in, I was automatically private first class, and the others were just like E1s, and in his eyes, I was not acting like a leader. And I think it's very important, if we act like a leader, if we're doing the things that a leader does, the others have more respect. And I think Moses was not acting like a leader in that situation, and he needed to be. And it's important because he's going to be leading these people.
Yeah. Leaders need to have the ability to see what a problem is and solve those problems and delegate those problems to people who can solve them. You notice what he says here. Find able men, those who fear God, men of truth, and people who hate covetousness. A good strategy. I mean, it's similar to what he's going to do in Acts, right? This is the reputation of the men who you are going to appoint over distributing the funds. And if you look at all these, and we don't have time to discuss them all, but this idea of if you're going to help people solve disputes, sometimes money's going to come involved in that. Taking bribes is going to be a possibility. You got to find people who not only love God but hate covetousness, because that's going to have a tendency to affect their judgment, and it's going to be tempting to them if they're covetous to actually fall into that sin over and over and over again. So Brian, and go ahead, Brian.
I'm not assigning this motivation to Moses, but I know sometimes this can come from pride, where you think, I'm the only one who can do this. Nobody else has my skills or my abilities, and then it just spirals out of control because it starts burning you out. And then you start, in your pride, looking down on other people and saying, well, nobody is even helping me. Why do I have to do everything myself around here? It's like, but if you're not activating other people and trusting them with this, then you're just setting yourself up for failure.
So if somebody has that mentality that, hey, I'm the only one that can do this, I'm the only one who can solve these problems, and they're not delegating, what is your response to that person a lot of times? Yeah, Matt, okay, if you think you're the only one who can solve all these problems, you're the only one who can figure this stuff out, I'll let you do it. And usually what happens? Eventually, it's not pretty, right? It's not pretty. There's all kinds of problems that happen as a result of that, until people realize there are other people who are good people who can maybe do it differently than you, but they can act in a way that God wants them to act. And you're going to have to let them do it. And even though it might not be the way you do it, it's still helpful to them. If you don't, then the whole thing is going to collapse eventually. Jason, then we'll have to move on.
I think it's also true that God will give us responsibilities. He obviously gave Moses a tremendous amount of responsibility, but he did not expect Moses to kill himself doing this. And I'm not saying that our lives may never be required in the service of God. That's a different discussion. But I think God went through Jethro because he knew Jethro respected Moses. And if God had gone to Moses directly, I think Moses might have taken it as an insult from God, that I'm letting you down in some way. And so I think he went that way with him so that he picked a voice Moses would listen to. And then that voice explained to him, somebody who he respected, explained, one, this is from God, and two, you're killing yourself. You're not going to be able to continue this. God does not, he expects us to serve him. He expects us to devote our life to him, but he does not expect us, I don't think, to kill ourselves in that fashion. That's why we have a congregation. That's why we're supposed to have elders. That's why we're supposed to have more than one elder. That's why we have deacons to help the elders. That's why we have members to help the deacons and the elders. He wants us to do it together, not alone.
Yeah, absolutely. So we all play a part in this, and that's what Moses had to learn, because this is going to be impossible for him to do. A couple things. He did do thousands, hundreds, 50s, and 10s, and they were supposed to judge in the small areas, and when they couldn't figure it out, they brought it to Moses, which makes a lot of sense. So does this work today? The same principle works today, right? Most of our militaries are based upon this same type of a principle. The person in charge can't do everything, so you delegate to smaller groups. You even look in the New Testament, you have centurions. There were over hundreds that works there. Businesses a lot of times operate the same way, right? You have managers and mid-level managers and people that might only have 5 people or 10 people under them. Some people have hundreds of people under them. It just is a principle that works. There's a guy that in our first work, who was an elder there. He was high up in Texaco at the time. I think he was the 3rd on their depth chart at Texaco, and he said that he taught this all the time to his people. He would even call it the Jethro principle. You have to learn to delegate stuff. If you're not going to delegate the stuff to the people under you, either you have bad people under you, and you got to make a change. You got to get good people under you, or you have a problem delegating, and if you don't fix that, you're going to wear yourself out. And it's not good for the people under you. It's not good for the company, and it's not good for you. It's not good for anybody. Learn to delegate the things that you have. And like I mentioned before, it's similar strategy to what was incorporated in Acts chapter 6. The apostles couldn't do it. Because what was it taking them away from? It was taking them away from what they needed to be doing, right? And so they were doing stuff they didn't need to be doing, not doing what they needed to be doing, to get other people to do what you don't need to be doing. And that's what happened in taking care of the widows. All right, so a couple photos up here. Brian showed you a photo the other day about the Sinai desert here. And you have the palm trees there that could have been where they provided the water. Deuteronomy 8, verse 15 says, who led you through that great and terrible wilderness, wherein there were fiery serpents, scorpions, and drought, where there was no water, who brought forth water out of the rock for you. So you look at this terrible, we would view, and think about this for a second. If Moses kept saying, I'm taking you to a land flowing with milk and honey, and this is where you start out, and this is where you're sort of stopping for the first time. You're like, I thought you were taking me to Florida and there's still snow on the ground. I mean, something's not right about this. I thought you were taking me to a land flowing with milk and honey, and I'm in this desert, and there's no food, there's no water. There's something wrong here. And so they have the complaining, and Brian did a great job trying to help us see this would have been difficult. Sometimes we're so quick to judge the people in the Bible and say, oh, they were such complainers. And God judges them, but you know what? I find most of the time, if I were in a similar situation, I probably would have acted in a very similar way. I go 3 days without water, I'm going to be complaining. I go 30 days without food, I'm going to be complaining. Right? I'm going to be really complaining. And so that's what they were. This next one just sort of shows you the mountainous region there in that area. It's hard to pinpoint exactly where Mount Sinai is. This is the historic site of where most people think Mount Sinai was, but you just see how mountainous it is there and how dry it was there and how difficult this would have been for them. The next slide shows a plain there around the mountains where the people could have assembled as all this is taking place. That's historically where people think that happened. And then this again is the Mount Sinai pictures. As we go, there's 3 mountains in a distance there. This is the one that they think is where Moses would have climbed up on that mountain to receive this. So with that in mind, picturing this mountain here. And they come, and Moses goes up on top of that mountain. Now, what do we know about what's going on the mountain? What does it look like? It doesn't look like this. And I couldn't find a picture that I thought really detailed it out correctly. But tell me, from what you've read this week, what was taking place on that mountain? What was it like? Just shout them out. Shout one word out for me if you want. What's fire and smoke. I'm scared of fire and smoke, right? There's fire, there's smoke. That's sort of scary. What else? The mountain is quaking. So you have fire, you have smoke, you have the whole earth shaking because of what's taking place there. I've never been in an earthquake. Could you imagine just the trembling and it doesn't seem to stop? You have fire, you have smoke. What else you have? Thunder and lightning. I don't like storms either, right? So you have lightning, you have thunder, you have fire, you have smoke, you have the earth shaking, and the people are afraid. So Moses goes up, and God tells Moses, it's time to take the people from being a large family. That was one of the promises to Abraham, right? You're going to have a large family. So now we're going to take this large family, and we're going to turn this family into a nation. Does the large family have a covenant with God? Yes. The sign of the covenant was circumcision. Now we're coming together as a nation, and we're going to come out and have this whole nation be in covenant relationship with me. So as Moses is on top of that mountain, God sort of lays out the details here. Here it is. I brought you out of Egypt. You all saw that. And I brought you so you could be close to me. If you obey my voice and do what I tell you to do, you will be special people to me. You will be a nation of priests, and you will be holy, for all the world belongs to me. Now, do you think he's proven that all the world belongs to him? Yes, he's done that, right? So now he says, out of all the people in the world, everybody out there, every nation, every group of people, I choose you, and I want you to be my special people. Here's the arrangement on your path. You have to do what I tell you to do. You have to obey my commandments. So Moses goes down to the people. I would love to know how this went, right? He goes down to the people. Could you imagine for a second if I just went up and talked to God, and God says, you tell them that I want that group of people to be my special people. And you tell them what they have to do is obey me. And I come down and say, guys, this is incredible. God loves you. He wants you to be his special people. He wants you to be in covenant relationship with him. He considers you to be holy. What you need to do is do what he says. Now, how do the people answer? You tell God he's got himself a deal, because that's a sweet deal. Everything that God says that we need to do in order to keep the covenant, we are willing to do. So Moses goes back up to God and he says, God, the people accept your deal. They want to be special people. They want to be a holy nation. They want to be a nation of priests. They accept. They said they'll do whatever you tell them to do. So God says, Moses, go back and tell them that in 3 days I'm going to descend on the mountain. And they need to go consecrate themselves, clean themselves, wash themselves, and be ready for my appearance. So Moses comes back down the mountain and goes, all right, guys, I told God what you said, that you agree to his terms. He says he's coming down in 3 days. I want to pause here for a second. I know I didn't give you a chance to think about this, but what would you think those 3 days would have been like? You've been through all this with God, right? All these plagues, God has delivered you, and now God says, I'm going to come down in 3 days. I'm going to descend on the mountain. What would those 3 days be like for you? We'll have something? Somebody else, raise your hand. We got a microphone back there.
Just anxiety and eagerness.
Okay, there'd be some anxiety, some eagerness. Are we usually anxious about things that we're not so certain of? Yeah, and God coming down, that's going to be some anxiety, some anxiousness there. And what was the other word you said?
Eagerness.
Eagerness. Yeah, there's going to be eagerness there. Now we want to ratify this, and we want to make sure that everybody knows that God has accepted us and we've accepted God as our God. I just can't imagine. I mean, I think I would have a hard time sleeping, right? And then if you know that you have to be consecrated, you have to be sanctified, you had to be ceremoniously clean when God comes down, how many times are you washing yourself, right? Yeah, I'm like making sure everything is exactly the way it needs to be, because I know what happens. I've seen firsthand what happens when you don't get ready to see God, right? And you don't recognize Him as God. And He does need to be respected. So there is this idea of eagerness and anxiety going back and forth in my mind over these next 3 days, not knowing what's going on. How many conversations do you think I'm having with my kids about this? Yeah, God's going to come on the mountain in a couple of days. No big deal. Yeah, it's not like that at all. It's like, all right, you got to do this. You're about to see something amazing. And let me just tell you this. What is about to happen is one of the most amazing days in the history of the entire world. And when Moses recounts this in Deuteronomy, he tells them this. We can read that in a moment or read it on Wednesday night. He tells them, looking back at it, what you experienced that day, nobody in the history of the world has ever experienced, and nobody will experience. Remember that day. Tell your kids about that day. Can you imagine having a story so significant to tell your kids? And you know what? We do. All right, that's the thing. We do have a story, a major story to tell our kids about God. All right, somebody has a microphone over here. All right.
We often look at this scene and we think, oh, but they should remember all the things that God has done for them, all the plagues and the wall of water and all the things that they've seen, and they should have more faith. And I know that I often think when I read something in the Bible, well, if I could just remember that every day. But then the day-to-day life things kick in, and you find that you've already forgotten it by the next day, unless you wrote it down and you stick it on your mirror. So you really have to keep all those things ever before your eyes and remember them all. But the day-to-day things just get in the way, and then you forget, and you fall right back into the place that you were before. So I think it's really hard to judge them.
Yeah, and that's why God constantly sets up reminders. He created us. He knows that we have bad memories. He sets these reminders up, and that's why the Lord's Supper is so important. That's why us talking about God is so important. That's why Bible class is so important. That's why just meeting together and talking about the wonderful things God has done is so vital to our life as Christians, because we do get caught in the day-to-day and forget. Phil?
I like the book of Exodus and the story that it's telling about God. God initiates this relationship in a powerful way. He didn't only just save them. Now He's going to present Himself to them on a mountain to reveal who He really is. He wants to be intimate with His people. He's going to use the Jewish nation as a microcosm of what He wants to do in the church and for anybody who will come to Him. When we get baptized into Christ, a lot of times we look at that and think, I'm done. I've been baptized. I'm united with Christ. But what Jesus is doing with us is the same thing He's doing with the people here in this place. He's drawing us closer to the Father through Him. And He's going to do the same thing with Moses. He's going to use Moses in the same way as God's presence is made known to the people through Moses and through the laws and everything that He's going to give them. He's trying to create an intimacy with them. And this vision of God on the mountain is going to be the thing that God wants to capture them with and to be captured by Him as well.
Yeah, very good. And one of the questions we'll talk about on Wednesday is, Moses draws near to God, the people stand far off. How do we get to where we don't want to be far off from God and we want to be closer to God? How do we get more like Moses instead of the people we're fear? Now, this event, the way that it is, God says, I did this to instill fear in the people so they will always obey me. So there is a sense in which God is showing directly to them who He is so that they do fear Him, respect Him, and want to obey Him. So the day comes 1, 2, 3, right? The day comes. It describes it, the thunder, the lightning, the thick cloud, the fire, the smoke, the earthquake. And it says the people trembled as Moses gathered them to the foot of the mountain. Now, could you imagine walking out to that mountain and you're getting closer and closer to that mountain, and maybe you're feeling the heat from the fire is more, the lightning, the thundering, and you get closer and closer. Now, God's already told Moses, don't let anyone touch the mountain. The result, if someone were to touch the mountain, stoned with stones or shot with an arrow, whether it's person or animal, don't touch the mountain. So Moses has built some kind of a parameter around this. Smart, right? I'm going to put the ropes. You know, you get those red ropes that go around things to keep you away from something that people don't want you to touch. Moses does something here to build a barrier. You got to get close, but stand back, because God said don't get any closer than this, and you don't want to get any closer than this. So when they assemble, another thing that God's already told Moses is, I am going to let the people hear me answer you. Isn't that an amazing thought? So what's going to happen is you're going to talk to me, Moses, and the people are going to hear me respond to you, so that they will always know that you're in charge, right? That you're mine. It doesn't work out very well with Korah. But at this moment here, Korah's here. And Dathan, Abiram, they're all here. They hear God answer Moses by voice, and yet they still rebel against him, as do Aaron and Miriam at one particular point. So you have all this, and so God basically calls Moses back up the mountain again and tells him, I'm going to give you one more warning. Tell the people not to touch the mountain. Moses basically, I got that taken care of, God. I put this boundary around the mountain. No one's going to touch the mountain. He goes, all right, you get down, and you and Aaron can come on the mountain. Tell everybody else to stay away. And then with the lightning, the thundering, the fire, the earthquake, you're gathered around that mountain. You see no form, but from heaven you hear these words. I'm in Exodus 20, in verse 2. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a carved image, any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them, nor serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing mercy to thousands, to those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is the Sabbath to the Lord your God. In it you shall do no work, you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long upon the earth which the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, nor his male servant, nor his female servant, nor his ox, nor his donkey, nor anything that is your neighbor's. I picture God having a much deeper voice. But could you imagine from heaven hearing the voice of God say all those things? what do you think your response would have been? Phil has a response. Somebody take Phil a mic.
I'd be like Daniel when I heard the voice. I'd feel like a dead man, like the life of me had been sucked out, and that I'd become totally self-unaware because I was so aware of the presence of God.
All right. Joe has something. I mean, think about what was their response as well. Joe?
I would feel overwhelmingly insignificant that you don't see this God, but you can certainly hear him in his clarity, the power that no matter what you thought of yourself, you're nothing.
Yeah. And it says they trembled. How many of you would be trembling at this? I would be trembling. I mean, I would be, and to be honest with you, I probably wouldn't have wanted a front row seat to that, wherever that boundary was. Sometimes people running up to the front, they want to be in the front, they want to be. I'd be like, you know what, you guys go ahead, take the front row seat. I'll just show some deference here. I'll get in the back. It would have been such an amazing moment. I would have been shaking like this, just hearing the voice of God. As a matter of fact, we only have 4 minutes. I want you to read Deuteronomy chapter 4 before Wednesday. But let's turn over there real quick because I want to get you some insight into this. I've asked this question to many people before I taught this. Who heard the voice of God on Mount Sinai? One church had 3 people that knew the answer. But a lot of people think it was just Moses. A lot of people think it was Moses and Aaron. Some people think nobody heard God's voice actually say these words. God just wrote it with his finger and gave it to them. But notice in Deuteronomy chapter 4, I want to go to verse 10. It says, especially concerning the day you stood before the Lord your God, when the Lord said to me, gather the people to me, and I will let them hear my words, that they may learn to fear me all the days they live on the earth, and that they teach their children. Then you came near and stood at the foot of the mountain. So now Moses is telling the people, he's writing this, he's telling all the people this to remember this. You stood at the foot of the mountain, the mountain burned with fire in the midst of heaven, with darkness, cloud, thick darkness, and the Lord spoke to you out of the midst of the fire. You heard the sound of the words, but saw no form. You only heard a voice. So he declared to you his covenant, which he commanded you to perform, the 10 commandments. And then in verse 15, take careful heed to yourself. You saw no form when the Lord spoke to you at the mountain out of the midst of the fire. Therefore, what does he say? Don't make any form to represent me. That's the basis of it. When you came to this mountain and you heard my voice speak those 10 commandments, my covenant. And in this text, if you read Deuteronomy 4, you'll see that God lays out this case here that was such a significant day. It had never happened before that. And it has not happened since, where God brought a whole nation of people together and let that entire nation hear from him directly what it means to be part of in this covenant relationship. This is what you're to do and not do. And at the very basis of that, when you were there that day, you heard the words, you saw no form, therefore make no form. Whether it's something that was on the earth, something beneath the earth, something that flies in the air, something that is in the water, don't make any kind of image that represents God because there was no form there. You only heard the voice. So significant. Read Deuteronomy 4, we'll continue talking about this. This is one of the most exciting days in human history and one of the most important days in human history. No other people has experienced it just like they experienced it that day. Thank you, everybody.